call this meeting to order. So welcome to meeting number 38 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. We will start by acknowledging that we are meeting on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin people. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Pursuant to the order of reference of Thursday, June 23rd, 2022, the committee commenced consideration of Bill C-21, an act to amend certain acts and to make certain consequential amendments, firearms. Today we have two panels of witnesses for the first hour, and I'd like to welcome from Airsoft in Canada, Brian A. McIlmoyle, Director, Nicholas James Martin, Member, who is with us by video conference, I believe, and Ziming Wan, Member. So welcome. We also have, is that second hour? Sorry, we also have with the Canadian Doctors for Protection from Guns.
For the second hour here.
That's second hour?
Yeah, second hour here.
So it's just the first hour?
No, that's the first hour.
First hour, yeah.
Okay, sorry. I'll catch up with you guys. So we also have the Canadian Doctors for Protection from Guns, Dr. Najma Ahmed, Dr. Philip Berger, and Dr. Julie Maggie. And with the Canadian Sporting Arms and Ammunition Association, we have Wesley Ann Winkle, President. So thank you all for joining us here. We'll start with statements from our groups of witnesses. So we'll start with Airsoft in Canada. Please go ahead. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Brian McIlmoyle. I'm the Director at ASIC, Saving Airsoft in Canada Association. I'm joined by Ziming Wan and Nicholas Martin by video conference. Thank you for inviting us here today. Airsoft is a sport practiced by tens of thousands of Canadians all across the country. Airsofters come from diverse backgrounds, all genders and orientations, English and French, casual or enthusiast, sport competitor or collector. Airsoft is enjoyed by those exploring military reenactments and simulations and by costume role players attending at anime conventions. Airsoft businesses employ over 1,400 people. Today is a very important day for these people. In Canada, recreational airsoft is a $220 million industry with more than $46 million spent annually on goods and equipment and more than $36 million on event production and tourism in the small towns that typically host these events. C-21, as currently written, would shutter this industry entirely. The Canadian film, video game, media industry is worth $9+ billion annually, with about $5 billion of those films involving firearms and airsoft gear. Rubber prop guns were made prohibited by Bill C-68 in 1993. Film armors have told us that they are entirely reliant upon the Canadian airsoft retailers because of the next day turnarounds required by film studios. They require direct access to retail sources for these airsoft equipment. Without it, film productions would be delayed for weeks. Since the accidental shooting of Halen Hutchins, we have been told that Hollywood productions have shrunk their demand for real firearms by 60% and have increased their use of airsoft by 40%, with some film unions calling to shift entirely to airsoft. 66% of Canadian film industry prop guns are airsoft. Film armors that we have consulted have stated that C-21, as currently written, would make Canada far less attractive for these productions, threatening that $5 billion in production. We understand the concerns of law enforcement. In our consultations with them, they noted their top concern was mistaking airsoft for real firearms, in particular where the youths and children were involved. Police are trained to treat any suspected gun as a deadly threat, and this has historically included Nerf blasters, Lego, camera tripods, musical instruments. We should be taking every practical precaution to prevent any potentially tragic incident for both police officers and the persons who are accidentally or negligently abusing airsoft. We believe that the best means to mitigate these risks is an 18-plus restriction on the purchase of airsoft, which would prevent children from buying airsoft without parental knowledge. In addition, a legal acknowledgement of risk or waiver, when signed and combined with some clear educational material, will impress upon parents and young adults the important and very mortal responsibility of owning airsoft gear. We believe that this will prevent the majority of police calls for service resulting from accidental and negligent use of airsoft. This would bring us in line with the majority of our peers internationally. If we are to go a step beyond that, ASIC has studied a self-regulatory system similar to that of the United Kingdom's UK Airsoft Retailer Association and the UK Violence Crime Reduction Act, which stipulates membership in an airsoft association in order to possess airsoft. This kind of measure would require higher administrative overhead, but there is a feasible appetite within our community. These measures benefit from joint positions with FSAQ, the Fédération Sportive de Airsoft du Québec, the AABC, the Airsoft Association of BC, and the CSAAA, the Canadian Sporting Arms and Ammunition Association. Bill C-21's proposed redefinition of prohibited device would eliminate airsoft as a sport by changing the legal classification of virtually all airsoft in Canada. It also affects a larger category of products, including paintball markers, pellet guns, Nerf foam blasters, etc., all of which would be impacted by C-21 to varying degrees. How C-21 is written would make airsoft illegal to buy, sell, import, export, or transfer, and would make them subject to confiscation without legal recourse. Current owners would be in possession of prohibited devices and subject to the relevant laws. There is no doubt the legal regulation around airsoft is confusing. Manufacturers, importers, CBSA, and law enforcement find it confusing as well. The legal context of airsoft involves multiple sections of the Criminal Code, the Firearms Act, and examples of case law that involve different definitions, qualifications, and quantifications. We suggest that this committee empower the Government Council to work with consultative bodies such as ASIC and to more comprehensive and exhaustively define replica firearm and or airsoft through regulation. We hope today that the committee can work with our community to develop a solution. I thank you for your time today, Chair, and I welcome any questions.
Thank you. And only 15 seconds over, so good. So we'll go now to video conference to the Canadian Doctors for Protection from Guns. Please go ahead, whomever, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Gun injury and death is an urgent public health issue. The Canadian Medical Association declares that firearm-related injuries and fatalities are a major cause of premature and preventable death in Canada. A 2020 Ontario study showed that over a 15-year period, there were nearly 6,500 gun injuries, 42% were fatal. Another 2020 Canadian study shows that 10 to 20% of patients with firearm injuries suffer lifelong disability. Gun injuries stress our economy and public health systems. Many of my patients never go back to work or school because of the physical and emotional trauma they have suffered. The toll on families and communities is unimaginable. Canadians have called on governments to reduce this threat to public health and well-being. Preventing injury and death from firearms is a multifaceted challenge that demands evidence-based solutions. Canada needs Bill C-21, with a permanent ban on assault weapons to save lives. Indisputable peer-reviewed evidence from around the world shows that restricting access to guns saves lives. The stronger the measures, the safer it is, and this is irrefutable. Canada has work to do. We rank 9th of 36 countries in the OECD for firearm mortality. The gun is the vector of harm and death. This is why assault weapons, firearms that can kill and maim many, many people in mere minutes, have no place in our communities. Banning these firearms will not necessarily make our society less violent, but certainly it will make the violence less lethal. It has worked in Australia, it worked in Switzerland, it even worked for a time in the US. A similar type of gun, the SKS rifle, which is not currently covered by the Order in Council. It was used recently to kill 2 police officers in Ontario. A clear line must be drawn to ban all semi-automatic rifles as part of this legislation. Further, CDPG supports the ban on the sale and transfer of handguns. International research shows that a woman is 5 times more likely to be killed in a domestic violence situation when there is a gun in the home, most frequently by a handgun. In 2019, the Canadian Femicide Observatory identified firearms as the most commonly reported means used to kill women and girls. All guns, including handguns, can be used to intimidate and control. Handguns smuggled from the U.S. are not the sole source of crime guns. A handgun stolen from a gun shop in Saskatchewan was used in the Danforth mass shooting. We support the proposed red flag law. Family members, physicians, and concerned individuals must have access to an efficient process to quickly have firearms removed from someone who may be at risk to themselves or others. In Canada, suicide accounts for about 75% of gun deaths. A gun in the home increases adolescent suicide rates by 3 to 4-fold. Evidence from other jurisdictions shows that red flag laws are effective in reducing firearm suicides. Most people who survive a suicide attempt do not go on to die by suicide. This is why restricting access to lethal means saves lives. Suicide attempts with a gun are almost uniformly fatal. Public education and easy access to a confidential process for removal of firearms would strengthen this bill. New York State offers its citizens an online application reviewed by a judge within 24 hours. We urge the federal government to work with provinces and territories to mandate physician reporting of individuals at risk of harming themselves or others. The ban on replica guns is good, but insufficient. Non-powered firearms have the speed and force to penetrate skin or eyes and are a source of injury to children and youth. We urge the government to create a strong regulatory framework for these guns. We recommend mandatory warning and education labels on all guns and ammunition at the point of sale, similar to tobacco and other products. The government must invest in the social determinants of health. I have seen how the trap set by poverty, racism, and the lack of opportunity combined with a firearm devastate young lives. I know the government has been listening to community voices. Now it must act. Finally, Canada would benefit from a deeper understanding of firearm injury. This bill should include a national firearms research and policy center to study existing and potential solutions to reduce harm from guns. For 20 years, I have been treating patients devastated by firearm injuries and consoling families left behind with immeasurable grief. Our sole interest today is to protect Canadians from gun injury and death. Thank you for listening to me so patiently. I'm here with my colleagues, Dr. Maggi and Dr. Berger, and we'll be pleased to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We go now to Mr. Winkle with the Canadian Sporting Arms and Ammunition Association. Go ahead, please. 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much. My name is Wes Winkle, and I'm the president of the Canadian Arms and Ammunition Association. We have a volunteer board of directors, and I represent over 4,100 licensed businesses in Canada, as well as over 40,000 employees. We have a 2018 study generated that shows that we have an $8.5 billion economic impact to our country's economy, and $2.6 billion of that is involved in sport shooting. Bill C-21, as currently constructed, gives us the danger of losing another 20%. We lost 20% in the May 1st order in council, and with the handgun freeze and the airgun prohibitions, we could be looking at a total of over 30%. This could lead to over 15,000 jobs lost in Canada. Businesses in Canada have invested millions of dollars to adhere to the strict regulations and the strict regulatory environment already imposed, and have done a great job in keeping hands out of the criminal element. Over 90% of handguns used in crimes are done through criminal means and are not sourced legally. The Canadian Association of Police Chiefs has denounced the handgun transfer freeze and says that it will not have an impact on crime guns in Canada, and we believe that to decimate our whole industry is a mistake. It is virtually impossible for our industry to keep up with the speed and volume of regulation changes that have been coming our way. And we've spent countless hours training staff and trying to remain up to date in our regulatory environment. We request some compromise and some relief inside Bill C-21 and in the current regulations. We've been asking for a change of the replica definition as previously discussed by the airgun industry. We're looking for the committee to consult the airgun industry and to find a way to identify firearms for law enforcement to ensure that they are differentiated from real live firearms. And again, recommend the implementation of the 18-year-old guideline for purchase. We request that the remove the transfer fees for individuals on handguns. Canada has probably the largest vetted and legal handgun ownership in the world. These sport shooters conduct their sport at ranges safely and provide no risk to the Canadian public. We have many participants that operate this in a safe environment, and the businesses ensure that these firearms only reach the hands of those licensed individuals. We're requesting that the government not cease the sale of firearms to these licensed vetted individuals, but rather find an alternative method to restrict ownership and to keep those vetted individuals available to purchase and stay in our sport. There's a possibility of capping licenses, but ensuring that we can continue to sell and trade current firearms amongst ourselves. We also ask that this committee look at respecting all competition shooters with the same exceptions as Olympic target shooters. We have sports as in international competitions such as Single Action Shooting Society or SAS, international practical shooting competitions such as IPSC and IDPA. These are internationally recognized shooting competitions with trained shooters that have dedicated their lives to their sport. They conduct it in a safe manner. They've always adhered to the government regulations, and there is no need to attack this community due to certain guns used in the criminal element. Furthermore, our businesses are asking that the government remove the downgrade of classification of firearms inside Bill C-21. By definition, the government has declared certain firearms a higher risk to society by labeling them as restricted and prohibited. And it makes no sense why the government would want us to stop downgrading these firearms. If they have deemed that the public safety is enhanced by changing the firearms from prohibited to restricted, why would we want to limit that? Businesses have spent thousands of dollars training gunsmiths and investing in equipment to produce equipment to ensure that these firearms get downgraded successfully and safely. There is no need at this point to restrict that. Furthermore, there's three more items discussed in the bottom of the regulatory amendments with an intention to be done by order in council. And we request more clarity on these things before they're brought in and a high level of consultation with the industry. First and foremost, on the magazine restriction intentions, to limit all firearms to 5 rounds or less would be a nearly impossible situation for the industry to conduct business.
Excuse me, if you could wrap up quickly. Thank you.
Yes. And we would also ask that that they look at those regulations closely and to consult with industry. Same with the firearms marking regulations and the enhanced security measures for storage. Thank you very much. And we're free to answer questions at any time.
Great. Thank you, and thank you all. We'll start our round of questions right now with Mr. Lloyd. Mr. Lloyd, please go ahead. 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank all the witnesses for coming here and sharing your unique perspectives. I'm going to start with a question for the Doctors for the Protection from Guns. I found it interesting, and my own research backed up your claim that 75 to 80% of firearms-related deaths in Canada are caused by suicide. And I note that the department in the last meeting justified C21 because of its ability to reduce suicide by firearms. I'm concerned, though, if you're aware of a 2004 peer-reviewed study from Jean Caron, which showed that while gun control measures did reduce the prevalence of firearm-related suicide, it didn't reduce the overall suicide rate as people found alternative means of committing suicide. I think we should be promoting policies that reduce suicide overall. We know we're in a mental health challenge, but it seems like this policy, it might have an impact on reducing firearms-related suicides, but do you have any evidence to suggest that it would reduce suicides? Absolutely.
Thank you for the question. There is actually strong evidence, and I'll defer to my colleague, Dr. Maggi, who is a mental health expert and knows this literature quite well.
Perhaps because of my limited time, can you please submit that evidence to committee for our review when we have more time? But thank you.
We would be delighted to submit, but we would also request that we be allowed to answer the question. 2 sentences, please. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
We will submit. I think in summary, the mental health community is unanimously in favor of means restriction, which has been put in place for many different, in many different areas to prevent suicide, including on things like bridges. Very few, a minority of people actually substitute. And when they do, they typically substitute to suicide attempts with less lethal means. So I'll leave it at that, and we will.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And we'll expect some more stuff. I was also interested in a Statistics Canada report from 2020 that said 4 out of 5 victims of violent crime, 83% of victims of violent crime, where a firearm was present, were either not injured, 61% of them not injured, or they sustained a minor injury that required no professional medical treatment or only some first aid. It says that victims, and this is from Statistics Canada, victims of firearm-related violent crime were less likely to be injured than victims where no firearm was present. How does that match up with the evidence that you have presented here today? This is Statistics Canada.
I'm not aware of that specific data, but I can tell you that a recent CMAG study published by an first author named David Gomez, cited a 42% mortality rate for patients who arrive to hospital. So I don't know that specific data. That's not peer-reviewed data. I'm not familiar with that data. I'd have to study that and get back to you on that. But that is not what the body of evidence shows, and that is not what we're seeing in our trauma rooms, our emergency departments, and hospitals on a daily basis.
Thank you. Moving on to my next question to the CS AAA. I noted that in the last meeting, I was asking about the 5-round magazine limit. And I'm aware that there are a number of primarily non-restricted rifles in Canada that can be substituted using a handgun magazine that can hold 10 rounds. Do you have any evidence that these firearms have been used or have been any inherent fact that these firearms have 10 rounds? Have they been used in crimes? Is this something that's a concern?
Absolutely not. There's been no direct correlation of data with those particular firearms that have the ability to have a higher capacity due to the pistol magazine exemption of the 5-round limit in semi-automatic firearms. There's been no evidence that those firearms have been used in crimes or there's been an increase in public safety concerns.
Yeah, and to clarify, nobody's suggesting that we should be legalizing high-capacity magazines in Canada, but for the case of these firearms in particular that could be impacted by this legislation, you haven't seen any, crimes. There hasn't been a public safety argument as far as you've seen that these are being used in crimes because of their capacity.
Correct. Yes, we've seen no data to suggest that there's an increase in public safety concerns.
One concern I had, there was a provision in the bill that said forcing people to show their license to prevent trafficking. For example, it said straw purchasing. I've always kind of thought straw purchasing for handguns or restricted weapons was a bit of a red herring, considering that they're registered. So anyone who would straw purchase a restricted firearm and then sell it on the black market would be really opening themselves up, because it would be quite easy to identify who is committing this. Can you maybe talk about straw purchasing? Like, is it a serious issue?
Straw purchasing represents a very small amount of guns that end up in the hands of criminals. It is still something that is on the radar, and the industry has worked a lot with NWest to identify straw purchasers. We've had a 3-year program now that has been extremely successful in lowering these amounts of straw purchasing.
Did you receive government support for this program, or was this something industry took on itself?
This is something that industry took on all on its own. We received no government support and no government direction.
Would government support help you to make that program stronger, you think?
Absolutely. We've requested it and we have not received it, but we would definitely help out.
Yeah, like in your case, can you, in my last few seconds, can you give examples of what kind of straw purchasing you've seen?
Yes, there's been a couple of examples where individuals have purchased handguns in volume from different retailers, therefore making it hard for the retailers to identify. However, every one of those transactions was approved by the Chief Firearms Office and the RCMP, and it seemed more concerning to us, and that's why we took it on as an industry to look into it. We could not understand how the Chief Firearms Office and the RCMP were not able to identify this before they approved the transactions.
I'm sorry, I have to cut you off there. Thank you. And the bells are ringing for a vote, so I need unanimous consent to carry on if there's a will to do so. I suggest we could carry on through the first, we have 3 more 6-minute rounds in this, 6-minute slots in this round. Would we have unanimous consent to carry on that far? I'm seeing support over there, support over here.
Some members who will be voting in the House.
So how long do we have?
15 minutes, I can
15 minutes, okay. We have unanimous consent for 15 minutes. So we'll try, we'll maybe shorten the 6-minute round to 5 minutes apiece, if that's okay. And then we'll be able to finish the first round. Okay? So we go now to Mr. Nur Mohammed for 5 minutes, if you please.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, before we start my time, I'm curious, why are we cutting the time? Do we have unanimous consent to cut the time, and why are we doing that if we're willing to keep going?
Well, we don't have unanimous consent to cut the time, but it is sort of a chair prerogative to try and fit things in where we can. So we've got 15 minutes unanimous consent to carry on, so we can finish the round if we do 5 minutes apiece, and perhaps we can make it up later somehow, right?
All right. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I will speak more quickly than I ordinarily would. Just wanted to thank all the witnesses for being here. I'd like to start with Dr. Maggi, because I think you touched on something really, really important in talking about suicides and mental health. And I want to ask you a question. In your professional opinion, do you think that reducing the number of guns in homes or guns available to people will reduce the number of suicides?
So we know that if you live, thanks for that question. We know that if you live in a home with a gun, you're 5 times more likely to die by suicide. And further, most suicides are impulsive actions, and that by impulsive I mean it passes between 10 minutes and an hour, the suicidal crisis. And so reducing the means by which someone can do something drastic in that period of time is one of the most important interventions that we can have for suicide risk reduction.
So in other words, making it harder for people to kill themselves makes it harder for people to kill themselves.
Correct.
Got it.
Yeah.
And that's an important intervention because what, in terms for you as a doctor?
Yep. So for me as a doctor, it's an important intervention because suicide is not, it's the end result of many different illnesses. And there's a lot of factors that go into, the final moment. And so being able to actually limit the means is one of the strongest pieces of evidence that we have to actually decrease the number of people who die by suicide. And as well for an individual, if I'm working with an individual, removing the means allows me to often keep them out of hospital for extended periods of time. It allows me to have more time to treat their mental illness if they have one. And so it opens up a lot of options by keeping them alive.
Thank you. And one brief if you can give me a brief answer to this question. I represent a riding with a lot of medical professionals, a lot of doctors, a lot of nurses. Mm-hmm. Tell us what it's like for you as doctors when you have to deal with gunshot victims. What is it like? What does that do for you? What does it do for the families? And why should we take that into consideration when we're making decisions around this legislation?
It's extremely difficult as a physician to see someone who has had a gunshot wound. But it's not just me. It's the entire the people who surround that individual who's had the gunshot wound. It's their family. It's their community. This is an injury that has multiple rippling effects that not, again, it doesn't just keep individuals, the individual who's injured out of work and decreased their own life and productivity, but it does so for their families and communities. And so all the stats we look at that are just, a statistic about the one person who may have died, that does not capture the rippling effects of gunshot wounds.
Well, thank you for that. I'd like to turn a couple of minutes that I have left to our friends from the airsoft industry. I think everyone in this room understands that airsoft guns don't kill people, but they do get people killed because of the way that they look and because of how they might be used, not in the way that you intended them to use, but perhaps because of their aesthetic, causing perhaps law enforcement to respond in a way that law enforcement should if they see something that looks like a lethal weapon. I don't think anybody here wants to shut down your industry. What is the industry willing to do to help ensure that the airsoft guns that you manufacture or that you use don't look like lethal firearms? I mean, we heard the Nerf analogy earlier, but look, a Nerf gun looks nothing like an airsoft gun. We don't want to shut your industry down. We do want to make it something that doesn't get people killed. So tell us what you would be willing to consider so that we can find ways to work together to make sure that people who are playing this for sport are not able to inadvertently become the cause of young people particularly dying.
I'm going to pass that question over to my technical specialist, Mr. Zimingwan.
Hello, Minister. Thank you for the opportunity to answer your question. So we've actually consulted many active duty law enforcement officers from multiple agencies across Canada. And the general consensus is that we would like to reduce these occurrences in the first place. And also that when this difficult situation does arise, the determining factor generally is not whether or not a person had an object that may or may not have looked like a firearm. The general consensus is that the determining factor is the body language and the mannerisms displayed by the person in this situation. There also have been many cases where objects that are clearly non-firearms have been mistaken for firearms. So an example of that would be Sean Arbuthnot, who is the founding director of ASEC, our organization. He was actually taken down at gunpoint in a city over a camera tripod that looked nothing like a firearm.
So just to interrupt with the time that we have, look, we are trying to find ways to find solutions. So rejecting the premise of the question doesn't help. What I'm trying to say to you is that we have heard from law enforcement saying that this is a problem. So we are trying to find ways to be helpful here. So tell us what you are willing to do to make sure that things that look like AR-15s that might shoot Nerf darts don't actually end up getting people killed. That's what we're trying to get to.
Just a quick answer, please, 15 seconds if you could.
Yeah, so with how I opened, I think that reducing these instances in the first place would be the best scenario. So we recommend liability waivers and 18 plus to reduce these instances in the first place.
Thank you. On y va maintenant, Madame Michaud.
We'll now go to Ms. Michaud. 5 minutes, please. Before we begin my time, Mr. Chairman, I think we all agreed to continue, and our time is cut by 1 minute. That's a big minute because we don't have much time. The Conservatives wanted us to go vote in the House. Could we cut their time instead of ours? You're speaking too fast for me. I'm sorry. Once more. We had agreed to continue despite the vote, but our time, the NDP and my time, is cut. The Conservatives are the ones who proposed voting in the House, so couldn't we cut their time rather than cut a big minute from our time?
They've already had their slot. You can't cut their time, right? I was trying to fit in a full round within 15 minutes. Mr. Nur Mohammed actually ended up with his 6 minutes. I'm going to propose that we stop at 15 that is agreed upon 15 minutes, and invite our guests to come back after the vote if they're able to do so, and we will continue wherever we left off. So if I don't know if our witnesses are going to be able to stay, but perhaps we shall proceed on that basis, and in that case, go ahead for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. And I thank the witnesses for their presence today. First, I'd like to address the Canadian Airsoft Group. I was listening to my Liberal colleagues say that the purpose of this bill is not to shut down your industry, but my understanding is that you were not consulted before the bill was tabled. Am I understanding this correctly?
Sorry, I didn't get that question.
Were you consulted by the government before this bill was tabled?
Je sais pas si on peut arrêter mon temps, c'est bien.
I don't know whether you could stop my time, please, Mr. Chairman.
Who typed that in the doc?
We will make allowances.
I apologize.
No, no, but
Can the witness hear the interpreter? Thank you. Well, thank you for your presence. I was wondering whether you'd been consulted by the government before this bill was tabled.
Thank you for your question. It's a very good question. And the answer to that question is no. The government did not consult the industry or the players' associations that exist in various provinces before this bill was tabled. And I think the volume of response from our community, including direct submissions to this committee, perhaps made it clear to the honourable members that this is a serious issue and that many people are engaged in it, and that a consultative process, when looking at legislating an industry away, should be part of that process. In this case, it was not. We were not consulted in any way.
Thank you. I agree with you. I think that's kind of strange when I hear my Liberal colleagues say we don't want to shut down your industry, we want to find some common ground, but you were not consulted at the outset. And I find this approach, at least by the Quebec Airsoft Association, with whom you probably work closely, was very constructive and very reasonable, because your industry is highly affected by this bill. Instead of saying we want to remove all these clauses that affect airsoft, you're looking to find compromises based on what's happening in California or in British legislation as well. I imagine that you agree with the recommendations of the Quebec Airsoft Federation, but I wondered if you could tell us more about how far you'd be willing to go to supervise your industry without shutting it down completely.
Another very good question. The airsoft community and industry has been operating in an absence of regulation for a very long time. And so one of the things that we want to achieve by this process is to bring in place clear regulations so that not only players but importers, retailers all know the lay of the land and can predict outcomes. This is one of the biggest issues with airsoft in general, because it operates within the spaces between regulation, and that's it's been a successful community for very long, built to the size that I mentioned earlier. But it's very true that this is an opportunity. This bill is an opportunity to clear away this landscape of unsure circumstances and put in place clear regulations. And what we propose, and our colleagues in the Quebec Federation as well agree, that a clear 18-plus requirement for purchase, a waiver at point of sale indicating clearly the potential responsibilities and dangers in possession of these things. In addition to that, clear markings and labeling on these devices so that people that purchase them know the responsibilities and know that they are responsible to ensure that they're used safely and according to the law. In addition, the application of clear regulations allows us to clearly provide that information to end users, importers, exporters, and purchasers and retailers. So, what we're really hoping to achieve here is a removing of the fog, so to speak, and clear regulation and a clear path forward for our industry. Our esteemed members have said they don't want to destroy our industry, but this bill does, completely and finally. And without clear regulation, it's devastating to many people who have invested their life savings in businesses and purchased property for these things to happen.
I'm sorry, sir, I have to cut you off there.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Madame Michaud, you have 1 minute left. I'm going to invite all of the witnesses to come back after the vote. I'm not exactly sure how long that'll be. It'll probably be half an hour. And then we'll finish 1 minute with Madame Michaud and then 6 minutes with Mr. McGregor. And I apologize to all, but the votes happen when they happen, so thank you. We are now suspended. To order. And sorry to the witnesses. Thank you for sticking around. And it's the way of life on the Hill is these things happen. So we will continue with Madame Michaud. Une minute, s'il vous plaît.
1 minute, please. Thank you. Is Mr. Winkle still there? I just saw him arrive. So I'd have a question for him. The Canadian Sporting Arms and Ammunition Association. We hear your membership say it's not by stopping an honest citizen who owns a rifle or a gun of some kind that will stop a criminal from shooting someone. We agree with you to some extent, and we also agree that there's a problem with the trafficking of illegal weapons. That's what causes deaths and injuries in cities like Montreal right now. That is what we see in the media. But I think that we have to focus on the fact that legal firearms remain dangerous, and it's normal and necessary for us to continue to oversee them. I'm not saying remove them from everyone everywhere, but oversee an object that can kill people. I think that's something that needs to be controlled. We have to remember, too, that there have been shootings perpetrated by owners of legal weapons, the Polytechnique, Dawson, the Quebec Mosque. There were shootings in Fredericton, Moncton, Vernon. Are you aware of that there are groups that are worried about what could happen again with the owner of a legal gun that could perpetrate a shooting? Are you aware that there are groups against this?
Of course I'm aware that there's groups against this. We are talking about completely shutting down the handgun industry. You said that we weren't looking to do that, but we are. We're completely restricting the sale of handguns to all vetted owners. Also, I'd like to say that we have a situation where these items are severely restricted and all of these owners are vetted by the RCMP. Is there any situation where you have 100% safety with any item? No, that's not the case. It's our job to do the best we can to limit the amount of these items getting into criminal hands. And I think the industry has done a very good job of that. Now we're taking extreme amount of resources to try to limit the less than 10% of firearms that are acquired legally, and not using our resources to attack the 90% that are not. And also, in the meantime, we're shutting down an industry that represents $8.5 billion to our economy and many, many jobs. And we can't minimize that. That's a great deal of cost to our overall economy and to these people in this industry that have participated in legally through their whole lives.
Thank you. Merci, Madame. We'll go now to Mr. McGregor for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for helping guide our committee through this study. I'd like to start with Airsoft in Canada. This summer, my constituent, John Bell, he took me out to the Victoria Fish and Game Protective Association, put me in some referee garb, and I got to watch one of your competitions. And you're right, I agree with your opening statement. There were people, young and old, all kinds of demographics who'd come to enjoy a good time in the outdoors. So very sympathetic to your sport. It's obvious that people who engage with it are very passionate, and as evidenced by the campaign thus far, they're very motivated to engage with this committee. So I salute you in your efforts for that political engagement. When we look at the way C-21 is currently written, having an airsoft gun suddenly deemed as a prohibited device. I mean, I know it's for the purposes of sections of the criminal code, weapons trafficking, possession for the purpose of weapons trafficking, and so on. So specific sections. But, I mean, what kind of an effect does that have on an owner, just knowing that suddenly your device is now going to be deemed prohibited, that kind of a chill effect?
Thank you for the question. I'll put that question over to my colleague, Nicholas Martin, who is our community liaison. He can answer that question. Thank you.
Hey, Alistair. Thank you for the question. So a few of the issues that we get right now are concerns about after the bill's passed, what happens if they were to go and sell it? Well, obviously that's illegal under the criminal code because they would be considered prohibited firearms for that purpose of the criminal code. But the immediate chilling effect is we have been told that we could keep the ones we have and we get to keep using them. But as C21 is currently written under section 11703 of the criminal code, it empowers the police officers to take airsoft guns on site. There's no reason for it. They don't have to have a reason, no probable cause, nothing. So the fear is that if they were to go to a paintball field, play an airsoft game, police officer could show up and just take their property because there's no way to get it back, right? So yeah, the fear is that
Can I just interrupt?
Play airsoft anymore. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry about that. It's just I have limited time. So you've made some helpful suggestions for our committee in your opening statement. You recommended an 18 or older for restrictions on purchasing, that risk waiver, making a person who's purchasing it understand the responsibility that comes with owning such a device. But when you look at how C21 is written, I'm worried about I'm trying to figure out how we are going to fit your amendments within how C21 is currently written, because what we're doing is we're adding a new section to the criminal code, specifically a section 3.2 after the existing 3.1 of section 84. Have you figured out some of the technical writing pieces on, do you believe this existing clause can be amended properly to take into account what you're hoping to achieve? I guess what I'm asking is, can you help guide our committee through how you would ultimately like to see this clause rewritten?
I think some of the difficulty right now has been that we haven't had consultation up until this point. So the process of being able to discuss what amendments we'd be open to or how to achieve them hasn't even been able to gun because the government hasn't spoke with us. But we would be more than happy to talk and explore options and how it can be fitted into the bill, what amendments are and are not possible within our community.
Okay, thank you. And I did hear you say in your opening statement and in answer to one of my colleagues that you were also looking for some, I guess, more specifics written through regulatory power. So maybe having this bill authorize the government to make specific regulations with how the guns are marked, et cetera?
Yes,
okay.
Yeah, I'll pass it back to Brian.
Thank you. Specifically, we're seeking to empower the government to make regulations in the context of this bill, because regulations is where everything really comes, where the rubber hits the road. And we're looking for regulations that clearly define, what a replica is, rather than a rather broad definition now, and hopefully specifically defining exactly what an airsoft gun is and how it fits within the context of the regulations, which clears the field for everybody and allows importers to import articles that meet those requirements, allows retailers to sell those articles that meet those requirements, and allows end users to confidently know that the objects that they have in their possession are not illegal and don't represent a risk for any sort of prosecution just by having them.
Thank you, and sorry for rushing you through this. I've only got 1 minute left, and I do want to get a question into the Canadian Doctors for Protection from Guns. I do appreciate your opening statement regarding the red flag laws portion of C21. As you may be aware, with the previous version of C21, the Canadian Association of Emergency Physicians was quite critical of that, and they were quite concerned with the onus that was placed on family members. I know this current version of C21 has built in a lot of added protections, like making sure that a cloak of anonymity can be brought down on the person bringing forward the complaint. Do you feel that the existing provisions of C21, as they've been reworked, you're quite happy with how they are in their current state?
Maybe I'll start and then Dr. Maggi could add. I think that, as we said, we are supportive of the red flag laws because they have been shown to decrease rates of suicide and mass shootings where they have in jurisdictions where they have been implemented, and if properly implemented to protect confidentiality and with the assistance of a safety plan to make sure that women and children are safe during the process in which those firearms are being removed. If we can educate the public, our police force, and women, we would look forward to building legislation that could protect women in these circumstances. Dr. Maggi, perhaps you have further comment.
Quickly to add, I don't see a provision within, and I may be mistaken, but I don't see a provision within this document to allow for physicians to make a report based on their interaction with a patient. And that to me would be something important to discuss, because there's nothing in there about being able to breach confidentiality, essentially. Secondly, important components, I think, for effective red flag laws would include the urgency of being able to access a judge and the training of judges. So I think thirdly, ensuring that there's not increased stigma for mental illness and that it's based on risk factors and not diagnosis of mental illness, which I understand is not in there, but that's part of the training that needs to happen.
Great. Thank you all. Thank you, Mr. McGregor. We'll start our second round now with Mr. Shipley. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd like to start with Mr. Winkle. Thank you, Mr. Winkle, is my good neighbor just up Highway 11 there. I'm from Barrie Spring, Oro-Medonte. I'm sure you're well aware where that is. So welcome today. Just a couple quick questions, Mr. Winkle, because we are under a tight timelines, and I'd like to get through a few here. Specifically, what amendments or changes would you like to see in regards to Bill C-21?
I'd like to see, first and foremost, that we when it comes to the magazine restriction, that we implement the words at minimum of detachable and center fire. When it comes to the magazine capacity restrictions, that way it will not limit the amount of firearms affected. Would like to see that we continue to allow all licensed and vetted individuals continue to be allowed to purchase handguns. We would like to see the committee work with the airgun industry to ensure that there are options of airguns to be sold and properly identified that do not, provide a high risk to law enforcement. And looking for the respect of all competition exemptions, similar to the Olympic exemption for all international competitive shooters and target shooters in all the different sports.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Mr. Winkle. Thank you for that. And if you did think of anything else, you could please put that in writing to us. I'd like to switch quickly, because I am going to be short on time, to my friends at Airsoft. I recently received an email. I'm not going to mention the gentleman's name. He's from Barrie. And this is a little lengthy, but I'm going to read a couple paragraphs from this and ask for your input on if this is normal, what's going on. Because I don't play Airsoft. Some family members have in the past. I don't know a lot about it. So I'm going to paraphrase here by starting. This is from my resident. It is truly a team sport that brings together players from all different walks of life and provides a community that accepts all sorts of people gathering around a common passion. I also believe that it has a part to play in getting the youth away from screens and video games and puts them out into an afternoon of play, requiring some physical efforts as well as critical decision-making. Airsoft has helped my life personally in so many ways, including sobriety. There is so much positivity surrounding the sport. I play competitively with a very active team every week, but I also play on another team called AAA, which stands for Airsoft Addicts Anonymous. We met up usually once a month or more, and it keeps growing and growing. Airsoft is for everyone and has zero downsides. It should have no place in this bill. It will break my heart if Bill C-21 is passed and these opportunities are taken away from the current and future generations of players having their favorite sport outlawed for reasons we do not find legitimate nor convincing. The letter's a lot longer. I'll leave it at that. Perhaps you could comment on that and tell me a little bit about the type of people who are playing this sport across Canada.
Thank you for the opportunity to answer that question. So I've been involved in the community since 2005, and I've seen people, mostly young men, because the demographic does slide to young men, participating in Airsoft, although that's broadening now. The appeal is broadening. But I've seen young men change before my eyes over a period of a couple of years from basement dwellers that don't see the light of day to young men who are empowered, who become leaders and mentors in their own right. this is what keeps me involved in this. I'm way older than most people that are involved in airsoft, but this is what keeps me involved in this community, is the transformation that happens with young men and women that get involved in this. It's inspiring to see. There's few opportunities for young people to learn leadership skills, and this is one of the environments where it does happen. To learn confidence, to learn how to interact with other people in a collaborative and cooperative way. All of these skills are learned and developed on the airsoft field. And the transformations of young people becoming adults, becoming entrepreneurs, starting businesses, and getting jobs to pay for their hobby, it really is something to see. So the impact is very large, and that letter is a very good example of the kinds of things that we hear every day.
Thank you. And I think, Mr. Chair, I'm very low on time. How much?
22 seconds.
Just very quickly then, this is probably not going to get much of an answer, but also a constituent of mine owns a paintball and airsoft pro shop in Barrie. He says that C21 in its current form will result in a loss of 60 to 70% of his revenue and force the closure of his business that he spent 20 years building. Are you hearing that?
Yes, I'll put that over to Mr. Wan. He's a business owner himself.
Hello. So I've been working in the airsoft industry for about a decade now, and about 50% of retail sales are from the airsoft devices themselves. So I believe the statistic that we gathered was over 90% of airsoft businesses expect to close immediately if C21 is passed in its current state.
Thank you, Mr. Shipley. So we're going to go now to Ms. Demoff for 5 minutes. We're going to have to terminate this round after Mr. McGregor so that we can get time to get the next panel in there. So go ahead, Ms. Demoff, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to all of our witnesses for being here. Dr. Ahmed, I think I heard you say you have to leave at 5:25, so I'm going to start with you. I want to thank you, first of all, for your advocacy. I know you've come under attack, you and the other doctors, from the Canadian gun lobby extensively. It's been horrific what you've experienced because you've advocated for public health measures. I know doctors have looked at the burden of injury from car accidents and advocated for seatbelts, for smoking and advocated for smoking laws, and the burden of injury from firearms is quite high. You mentioned suicide. We know that gender-based violence, the women who are subjected or live in a home with a firearm are more likely to be coercive control used. I had an extensive conversation with Dr. Alan Drummond about the red flag laws, and I know you mentioned you're supportive of what is in the bill. One of the issues that Dr. Drummond explained to me is that red flag falls under numerous jurisdictions, both provincial and also the physicians and surgeons, your society yourself. And
yes.
Can you clarify, as it was explained to me, if there's an obvious immediate danger, the physician is able to call the police or hold somebody in the hospital. But if there's a suspicion that there could be a danger to either to themselves and others, there's no mandatory reporting, and that's actually does not fall within the federal legislative framework. Is that correct?
Yes, as you correctly point out, it is complicated. And because firearms legislation is a federal jurisdiction, but physician regulation and the healthcare system is a provincial matter. And so you are correct, and I'll hand it over to Dr. Maggi, who can explain the responsibility of physicians related to people who are an immediate risk to themselves under the Mental Health Care Act. But as it currently stands, there's no way for a physician, if they are concerned about the safety of a woman in a domestic situation, or they're concerned that that person might kill themselves with a firearm, to have those firearms removed. There are many other examples where we have the responsibility, the mandated responsibility to report. For example, if tonight I see someone in the trauma bay who is injured while they're driving their vehicle drunk, I have a duty to report in a mandatory fashion. Similarly, we have an obligation if we are concerned about a child being abused in their home to report that in a mandatory fashion. But there are gaps, as you are outlining, and I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Maggi, who may have further comments in this area.
2 minutes left. Sorry, I'm going to cut you off just because I only have 2 minutes left. So
Sure.
Absolutely.
I think there's an opportunity for the federal government to take some leadership on this and work with the provinces and the licensing bodies.
Yes.
To our friends at the Airsoft, this recommendation, as you know, has come from the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police. The government didn't just come up with it on their own. In June of 2021, I met with the Airsoft Business Association. I did pass their comments, similar to yours, on to the previous ministers. So, and you have been meeting with the current minister's staff to discuss the types of things. Is that correct?
There has been the opening of meetings, so it's at preliminary stages at this point, and so we're hoping to develop far more connections and more meetings.
So would you be open to safe storage regulations?
So safe storage and transportation is something that we absolutely are interested in, and our community is not against it.
And we had the opportunity to chat. You mentioned a UK model that is used that you're going to provide us in a written brief. Could you perhaps just very quickly describe that?
Yes. So the UK model brings into place a requirement to be a member of an insured association before you can purchase an airsoft gun. There's a two-tier system in there in which the lower tier of airsoft items are colored or partially transparent, and these are widely available. And then the higher tier...
Sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off because I have a really quick question for Mr. Winkle.
I'm sorry, your time is way past.
It's not. It's 5 minutes right now. Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
It just, I had a little bit of time left, Chair.
Maybe a quick answer if we could.
What role do you think gun shops can play, Mr. Winkle, in assuring effective and safe buyback on firearms?
Well, I think that gun shops have a natural objection to the buyback program as a whole because of the a large amount of disinterest in the program through the legal firearms community. We've seen that provinces such as Alberta, Saskatchewan, Yukon, and now New Brunswick have agreed to opt out of all the buyback initiatives, and therefore at this time I think that most of the gun shops would look to be opting out of a buyback situation.
Thank you, Mr. Muff. On y va maintenant à Madame Michaud.
We'll now go to Ms. Michaud for 2.5 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question for the Doctors Association. I read in a La Presse article published in 2019 statements by Dr. Andrew Beckett, who trauma surgeon at the Montreal General. He said that not all cases make it in the media. At the hospital, he gets about one patient a week injured by a bullet, and that's probably what encouraged him to advocate for better gun control. He says you have to see these patients as a public health crisis, and this crisis is increasingly grave in Canada, but it is avoidable totally. This is a position that has to be taken in the perspective of public health, just like seat belts in cars or helmets on bicycles. These are measures that save lives. So my question for Dr. Maggi, I'm sorry, I may not have pronounced your name properly, but in your opinion, do you think that the government sees the proliferation of firearms as a public health issue, the way it has broached it and tabled Bill C-21?
So I do think that it has started to see the problem of guns as a public health issue, and the reflection of the extreme risks, the red flag law within there, I think, is one example of that. But I think one thing we need to realize and be cognizant of is that even if we don't see something like the word health in the legislation, the limiting of handguns and the limiting the proliferation of guns is an example of a health intervention. And that's the kind of thing we see reflected.
That's what I understood. You were in favor of measures such as the yellow flag, red flag. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Because we heard recently, and since the bill was tabled, many women's groups across the country say that, especially when it comes to the red flag, this was a measure that endangered victims because even though their identity may be protected, they're putting themselves in danger by denouncing an aggressor. What do you think about that?
Is a very excellent point, and I think that it's critical that we work with women's groups to ensure that any legislation put forward does not increase the risk of individuals. And I don't think it's something that we can very quickly sort out in 2 minutes. I think this is an important question for ongoing discussion. I see very similar things in my clinical practice when I'm bound to report child protection issues in the context of domestic intimate partner violence. And in that situation, I'm bound to make an immediate phone call. And there's a whole system in place to ensure that family, that child is kept safe. We need something similar in this situation.
Thank you, Messi. We go now to Mr. McGregor for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll use the remainder of my time again with Airsoft in Canada. This is the one time we have you before our committee. I think when the committee was suspended, we were having a conversation about what the UK has. You mentioned 2 tiers of airsoft, some that are, I guess, translucent, obviously don't look like a real firearm, and then there's a more, quote-unquote, professional class. Other jurisdictions, I think California might require an orange tip on the end of the barrel. When it comes to the appearance, I know that a lot of people in the sport, they've spent a lot of money on airsoft guns that really do look like the real thing, and that's very important to industries like the film industry, where they want to use a replica to reenact a historical scene, as an example. I guess this could happen through regulations, but have you fleshed out anything on the topic of how we could modify their appearance, or even when the airsoft guns are in transport, so that it's quite obvious that when you're carrying it, maybe it's got an orange tip on it, it could not be mistaken when you're going from your place of residence to where you're engaging in the sport. Anything you can add to that conversation?
Thank you. I'll put that question over to Mr. Wan as our technical expert.
Hello, and thank you for the question. I believe that having something like an orange tip may not be the most effective solution to that. I think that one of the problems right now is that there is no federal level transport law regarding airsoft devices. Right now they're under municipal bylaws. So what would be helpful is if there were a universal transport type regulation where you had to use an opaque container so that you are not carrying one of these devices in the public eye.
So you could never make that mistake of being mistaken for carrying something that looked like the real thing, having that opaque case. In your mind, that's the preference for your industry.
I think that is something that most responsible players are already engaging in.
Yep.
However, it would be good if that were enforced more so than individual retail outlets telling their customers to do so.
Okay. Well, thank you for your answer. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. And that kind of brings our second round to a close as far as we can go. I would like to thank all of our witnesses for sharing their time with us and their expertise and for helping us in our study. And with that, I will suspend as we bring in the second. Say?
2 minutes suspension.
Thank you.
We will suspend for 2 minutes. Thank you. I'm calling this meeting back to order. Just for everyone's clarification, we have a hard stop in 35 minutes, so we'll get what we can get done in that time. So we'll start by welcoming the witnesses. We have with the Canadian Shooting Sports Association, we have Tony Bernardo in the room with us, and by video conference we have the Fédération Sportive d'Airsoft du Québec. Apologies
Apologies for my pronunciation. Yannick Guinec.
First Vice President. Francois Gauthier, Second Vice President. So let us start with statements from our witnesses. We'll start with Mr. Bernardo. Mr. Bernardo, go ahead, please. 5 minutes.
Hey, thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Tony Bernardo. I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. We are 62 years young, and in our entire time have never had a single fatal accident on a shooting range, which is not bad. In keeping with the 5 minutes allotted for me to speak, and in the purpose of brevity, I will refer you to my curriculum vitae for more details. The people who are using guns now aren't the lawful owners that have registered guns and done the background checks and have been trained and safely store them. That's not who's committing the violent crimes. It's people who are using smuggled guns from the United States. That's the vast majority of guns used in crime, handguns. There are all kinds of laws in effect now that they're disobeying. So adding more laws for the lawful owners isn't going to impact the criminals who don't care about laws. They commit them all, including murder. Banning lawfully owned handguns is just not going to solve the problem. That is a quote from Chris Lewis, former OPP commissioner. National Police Federation President Brian Sauvé testified, resources should prioritize the criminal use of firearms with a coordinated strategy that effectively combines prevention, law enforcement, and social programs. Deputy RCMP Commissioner Stephen White testified, the reality is that the number of firearms that were seized last year across the country, well over 30,000. The National Tracing Center under the Canadian Firearms Program just traced a very small percentage of those handguns and other firearms. And speaking before this very committee, February 2022, Mark Weber, the national president of the Customs and Immigration Union, testified, perhaps the most glaring of all are the rail mode operations, where according to the union's own data, as of 2019, only 1/1,000,000th of all rail cargo was effectively being examined. Just repeat that, 1/1,000,000th of all rail cargo was being examined. The reality is our current operational abilities in the rail field are virtually non-existent. As of last month, media outlets have reported that 661 repeat offenders, all arrested for committing other serious crimes, were also charged with 1,514 counts of breaching firearms prohibition orders. And yet our public safety minister refuses to lift a finger to fix Canada's broken firearms prohibition order system to address this serious public safety issue. CSSA, our organization, even went so far as to present a system to remedy the firearms prohibition order problem, but no response was received by the current government, nothing at all. These experts have all told you the problem. They've told you the so-called science to reduce gun crime. It's right in front of you. They've told you. Why is this government not listening to them? Why are you directing the efforts of this government of Canada against the law-abiding, as opposed to directing them against the criminal misuse of these objects? It seems clear the government is engaged in a witch hunt against millions of lawful Canadian citizens, but it begs the question, why? I would like to also address in this the devaluation and confiscation of handguns, because this bill clearly does not simply freeze handguns or their transfers. It mandates the fiscal destruction and finally the compensation or the confiscation without compensation. And worse, It doesn't confiscate them from me. It takes the cowardly route of confiscating millions of dollars of property from grieving spouses left behind when their loved one perishes. It literally robs large sums of money from the purses of widows and widowers at their worst moment of vulnerability. And it leaves this obscenely immoral issue to another government to deal with. England didn't do it that way. Australia didn't either. Even New Zealand had the courage to pay compensation to its citizens. And yet this government chooses to ignore the experience of our Commonwealth partners and British common law. Even this government recognized how wrong this was when they enacted the May 2020 order in council confiscation of modern sporting and hunting firearms. They pledged fair market compensation for the theft of these firearms. What's the difference? Well, the May 2020 guns you want to take away from me. The handguns are going to come from my grieving widow.
Could you wrap it up, please?
Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you. On y va maintenant.
We'll now go on to Mr. Guénette with the Fédération Sportive d'Airsoft du Québec. 5 minutes, please. Thank you. And good afternoon, everyone. At the outset, let me point out that the Fédération Sportive d'Airsoft du Québec, FSAQ, is in favor of controlling legal and illegal firearms that are acquired legally or illegally. The markers of airsoft resemble real firearms, therefore is directly affected by C21, as are many small and medium-sized businesses throughout Quebec and Canada. So we want to dissociate ourselves from the gun lobby because most airsoft players in Quebec and Canada do not own firearms and don't intend to own any. They play airsoft as recreation. It's like nature play, which is very realistic. The FSAQ wants to cooperate with the government and authorities in order to withdraw airsoft from the parameters of C21 that will allow us to continue to play our sport in a safe or legislated environment. The FSAQ was created in 2018 after the meeting of many stakeholders in the airsoft world. Our main goal is to promote synergy and the flourishing of this game, organizers and retailers in a safe way. Our mandate is to establish official recognition of the sport and represent the community with government, as was the case in 2020 when the FSAQ was the bridge between the Quebec airsoft community and the government of Quebec when it implemented health measures under COVID-19 rules. Our exchanges allowed us to demonstrate that we could practice this sport safely. C21 will deprive players of this game that's played by tens of thousands of Quebecers and Canadians of every generation and walk of life, not to mention the economic spin-offs of airsoft. This inclusive, respectful, and diversified community resembles Quebec and Canada. It allows us to stay in shape and go beyond our capacities. For this reason, the FSAQ is asking you respectfully to take into consideration the impact that C21 will have on honest citizens that play airsoft. Following broader consultation with organizations, the community, and international representatives from Japan, the UK, California, and others, where gun control is more severe than in Canada and where airsoft is permitted, the FSAQ prepared a series of recommendations to provide a framework for safe practice of airsoft. You will find in our brief different solutions such as minimum age to buy markers, transportation of them, their appearance, the creation of federations or sports association to provide supervision, to name just a few. We encourage the government to follow the example of other countries that have done this by working closely with representatives of the airsoft community. that will allow us to practice our sport without altering the realistic, immersive, and recreational aspect of it. In closing, we want to thank the Standing Committee for allowing us to testify about the main issues of Bill C-21, and we reiterate our openness to working with you to find a viable solution to make it possible to continue to have airsoft in Quebec and Canada. It has existed since the 90s. I'm with my colleague François Gauthier, and I thank you for your attention.
We'll start our first round of questions, our only round of questions actually, with Mr. Mott. Mr. Mott, please go ahead, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Mr. Bernardo, Mr. Gwinnett, and Mr. Gauthier for being here today. Mr. Bernardo, I'm going to start with you. As an industry leader, would the time the government and the government expenses and resources they've already expended on gun control have garnered a greater result if it were focused on illegal firearms, and what would you recommend they should focus on, and how do they do that, giving your opening remarks?
Well, I think, thank you, Mr. Moutz. I think that the first thing we have to do is start getting young people out of gangs. That's a huge thing right there, and it needs to be done, and it needs to have a real concentrated effort. I'm not talking about putting in basketball courts. I'm talking about doing stuff to make people not want to be in gangs. And part of the plan that we had given this government was to do precisely that. And like I said, we never even got a response.
So you're talking similar to my friend Marcel Wilson's one-on-one movement out of Toronto, which is doing exactly the same thing.
Yeah, and Mr. Wilson's program is absolutely knock it out of the park. It's really good.
So you had mentioned a couple of things, and you've been around this industry for many, many years, decades, and I know, I've worked with my colleague across the way, Ms. Damoff, for years on this before I was on this committee, and I know she's well-intended, and I know the government is well-intended, but we have divisions not only on this issue but other issues, but we have divisions in this country on this issue, and I believe it's because people don't understand the current laws we have, and they work. But what, from your perspective, why do we have the great division on we have this huge need for gun control, and yet there's the people who are equally as passionate and believe the evidence that's before them too that says we don't need the gun control, we need gun control, but not what's being proposed. What do you say to that?
Well, I think that there's a number of factors in play. First of all is media. Everything that most people learn about firearms comes from either a Hollywood movie or watching the CBC. And quite frankly, neither one of them is very accurate. Firearms ownership in Canada is a huge step. It takes months to get a firearms license. And of course, right now with the Firearms Centre being backed up for at least 8 or 9 months on the services that we actually pay for, we are not even seeing that. People can't get courses. There's no availability. And so we're trying to get people safe here. All the safety things, every safety measure that has been legitimate and actually saved lives came from our community. It didn't come from an airy-fairy world of, geez, maybe we'll try this. We know what to do with this. That's why our safety record is as impeccable as it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. I really appreciate the perspective on that. You had mentioned earlier that crime guns seized by police, and examined by NWest and others, have shown that the majority of crime guns, and I'm going to mention Toronto because that's where we have as many homicides as there is anywhere related to gun crime and gangs. I've heard as high as 9 out of 10 of those firearms are crime guns used in the commission of an offense are smuggled in from the United States. You mentioned rail. What else? What can we do? We're actually trying to make a difference here on smuggled firearms, and I think we all agree that's our number one issue. How do we deal with that appropriately?
I think there's been a lot of great efforts made on this already that get more money into the hands of CBSA. But of course, every time somebody does something preventative, the crooks think up a new way to beat it. So you have to always stay in front of them all the time. And there simply isn't enough money. There simply isn't enough. And I realize that there's government announcements coming out saying we put X number of extra 100 million into CBSA to find guns this year. But if you look really carefully, they also took it out someplace else.
Exactly. The point I guess you could make to that is if we would take, rather than the money that's going to be from the confiscation of firearms under the OIC from May 2020, that $2 or $3 billion is a minimum. The cost is going to be, plus this cost could be put toward effective dealing with smuggled firearms. The other issue, and I think I only have a limited time left, breaching of bail conditions on prohibition orders already. 660 some offenders with over 1,500 offenses and firearms offenses. The revolving door of justice, this is what aggravates Canadians. This is why they lack trust in the justice system, have lost trust in governments who don't fix the loophole in the revolving door. How do we fix that?
Well, there's a number of ways to fix it, and the system that we had proposed before is one of the ways to do it. But the biggest problem, as we see it, is there's not enough jail spaces. So what happens unless somebody's committed a murder? They slap them with a firearms prohibition and out they go. And we've got one guy now we've actually found that's had 17 consecutive firearms prohibition and never done a day in jail because there's nowhere to put them. So what you got to do is give some teeth to that firearms prohibition order. And I'd be happy to work with any member to deal with this because this is a chronic problem that needs to be dealt with, and we have a solution.
Thank you, Mr. Mott. You have 5 seconds left. So we go now to Mr. Chang. Go ahead, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is, I'd like to thank the witness, first of all, for all participating in our panel here. My question is directed to Mr. Yannick. Myself, as a former police officer, I understand that while airsoft guns may not be able to kill people in most cases, severe safety risk arises when law enforcement officers cannot tell the difference between an airsoft gun and a real gun. If they do not know if it's a real gun, they have no choice but to assume it is a real gun. As a result, people possessing airsoft guns have tragically lost their lives. As expert of airsoft sports, how do you propose we differentiate airsoft guns and replica guns from the real thing? Maybe with bright colors or indicator of some sort? What would you suggest?
Thank you for the question. I'll allow my colleague to complete my answer. We are proposing certain types of marking. For the first part of your question, I'll let my colleague answer you. Thank you, Yannick. Hello. When it comes to resembling a real firearm, it's difficult to do because everything looks like a firearm, including a tripod for a photographer, or some construction equipment can look like a firearm. It's always difficult. We had an intervention in Quebec. A police officer had to intervene, and unfortunately, there was a complaint about the person having a weapon. These are things that can happen, this resemblance. It's difficult to recognize what's a real firearm and what isn't. As my colleague Yannick said, we are in favor of some marking and some regulation, be it in terms of transportation or tightening the law about people who wave around an airsoft in the framework of a non-recreational situation. But we are prepared to have some marking, to have some distinction.
Thank you so much for your answer. I will, Mr. Chair, I would give up my time to Mr. Shifsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chang. Mr. Shifty, please go ahead. 3 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Guenette.
Thank you very much, Mr. Guenette, Mr. Gauthier, for your presence and your opening statement. In order to guarantee that this bill strikes a good balance between supporting the members of the airsoft community in Quebec and across the country, there are many in my riding of Vaudreuil-Soulanges. Would you be in favor of having airsoft owners be obliged to have secure storage of their airsoft? That's my first question. When it comes to storage, as we say in our brief, we are 100% in favor of safe storage, and we're in favor of safe storage during transportation, too. Thank you, Mr. Gauthier. Second question, are you in favor of airsoft owners having to get a permit to get an airsoft weapon? Yes, a permit will mean additional spending for the taxpayer, perhaps starting with the 18 years or over. That would be a good option. Third question, would you agree to require that airsoft weapons be manufactured from now on so that they cannot be mistaken by a police officer or by a victim of armed robbery with a real weapon? Yes, of course, but there are different ways of ensuring that an airsoft toy doesn't look like a weapon. Perhaps we'd have to sit down with the industry and see what could be done and what would be acceptable to all. Okay, and when we're talking about that, does the community want to have something that looks like an AK-47, for instance? Is it important that it look as real as possible, or do you think it'll bother them if they have to buy something that does not look like a real weapon? The problem right now is the definition of resemblance. What may not have looked like a gun 10 years ago may be different today. I'd urge you to go and look on the internet and put in F2000. The answer is yes, but we really have to agree on what looks like a real weapon or not. And there's a lot of work to do in that direction. Thank you, both of you, for your answers.
I have are for the Coalition for Gun Control. There have been some discussions about some of the things that are not included in this piece of legislation, most notably...
Point of order, Chair. That witness is not here. Am I correct?
Oh.
That's correct.
Okay. Then I would imagine that concludes my line of questioning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shifke. On y va maintenant, Madame Michaud.
We'll now go on to Ms. Michaud for 6 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the witnesses for their presence. I thank Mr. Guenette, Mr. Gauthier for accepting our invitation to testify today. It's greatly appreciated. We had met a few months ago, and you familiarized me with a sport I wasn't aware of at all. I think C21 affects that sport rather unfairly. I want to salute your approach, as I did with the Canadian Association. It's quite constructive. I read your brief. You suggest solutions and you strike a balance. And it's constructive for the dialogue we're having today. So I thank you for that. I greatly liked the questions put by my colleague, Mr. Shifke. I would have liked the government to have asked these questions before tabling C21. It's my impression your industry wasn't consulted by government. And here we are with measures that are quite vague, and that is what I want to ask you about. You talked about the definition of resemblance in a document the government gave us to explain how it was approaching this bill. They say what they want to prohibit, compressed air weapons that look like real weapons. So where are you in all that? Where are the manufacturers and retailers of airsoft positioned in this? Because to my mind, it's kind of vague. What looks like a real firearm, what does not? I think that has to be defined in the bill. When we heard the officials a few weeks ago, they didn't seem to know what it meant. So before legislating on these issues that have a great impact on your industry, I think it would be a good idea for this to be clear. So could you tell us a bit more about this definition of resemblance and how could we make sure that airsoft toys that are very similar to real weapons could be modified before being marketed? Well, you're totally right. You're completely right. I think that anecdotally, the first draft of C-21 found out about airsoft for the first time. This is a good opportunity for us to position ourselves. The definition of what looks like a real firearm is very subjective, because whenever there's something that looks like a gun, a tube with a hole at the end and a handle, for just about anyone, in pretty much any situation, that could look like a gun. Our first recommendation, if the bill were to go ahead in its current form, would be to remove under Clause 2, Paragraph 1. That's where the problem arises. That's the biggest problem we have right now with the definition under C-21. Thank you. You were saying earlier that you would be prepared to do certain things, for instance, insist on being 18 or older to buy an airsoft, safe transportation, perhaps similar to what sports shooters do with real guns, maybe specific marking. Is there anything else you didn't mention? I saw in your brief that you wanted to inspire yourself from the California law, the British law as well. So are there other things that you haven't mentioned? Well, there are various good practices. There are various very good practices worldwide that could be used. I invite all interveners to try to find whatever would be perfect for Quebec and Canada. Having said that, I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that retailers in Quebec have been proactive already for airsoft buyer to get casing to transport this safely, be it bulk buying or just one marker. We've been proactive on this, and that's the main reason. Since 2018, we want to promote the safety of our sport. Thank you very much. I saw that Mr. Gauthier had his hand up. I don't know if you want to add something. Yes, I'd like to add one thing. In Quebec, and I don't know if it's the same in Ontario or other provinces, we have a big community of players who are accompanied by adults. They're young people, children or teenagers, who come and participate with airsofts with their parents. There are the Little Warriors in Quebec, 2,600 members that have compulsory safety training in using the airsoft before they can take part in an event. In Quebec, we take into consideration that the biggest organizer is the Petit Guerrier, Little Warriors. For any minor who wants to participate in an event, they have to have some training on health and safety and handling an airsoft. That could be something applied too. Thank you very much. I don't know if I have any time left for Mr. Bernardo. 10 seconds. 10 seconds. Okay. We'll drop that. We'll talk later. Thank you for your witness, Mr. Bernardo.
Merci, Madame Michaud.
Thank you, Mr.
McGregor, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Bernardo, I'd like to start with you. Within Bill C-21, because it does cover a few different areas, Clause 14 of the bill does provide that for some of the offenses in the criminal code, such as possession of a prohibited or restricted firearm, possession of a weapon obtained by the commission of an offense, and a number of weapons trafficking charges, it does provide for an increased penalty going from the current 10 up to 14 years, so allowing a judge freedom to impose a harsher sentence. Are you in agreement with that section of the bill?
Yeah, we don't have any problem with that, except that if you look in the reality, they're never imposed.
Well, I mean, let's not deal with hypotheticals. We can only deal with the bill in front of us. We have also had some testimony regarding the red flag laws. We of course want law enforcement to have the first crack at it, and they should be taking responsibility when a firearm might be posing a danger to someone or to someone else. But there's been a little bit of a discussion over giving people who might be under threat of domestic violence, especially when a firearm's within the home, the ability to go to court to get an emergency protection order, and allowing the judge to protect that person with anonymity, because if it was found out that they brought the charge against someone, their life might be in danger. Do you have any opinions on that, on giving people further abilities to protect themselves when a firearm might be in the home?
No, we have no problem with that, but we've been living with red flag laws for 25 years now. This is not new. Okay, this is an enhancement of existing laws, but for 25 years now, if someone was to make a complaint that they were being threatened with a firearm, the police have the ability to come right that minute and remove the firearms. That's in Bill C-68 in the Firearms Act. So that's been around for a long time. In terms of an enhancement of that, again, no problem with enhancement, but I think you might be running into a little bit of a legal issue here, because we're supposed to be able to face our accusers. And that's in British common law. So that's something that this committee would have to deal with. This is certainly beyond my level of expertise. That would be Supreme Court stuff.
Sure. Given that you are here representing the Canadian Shooting Sports Association, I want to turn my next question to shooting sports, to the different disciplines. So in Clause 43 of the Act, it does take the time to specifically mention the program of the International Olympic Committee or the International Paralympic Committee. I guess, to your mind, what number of people are practicing in those specific professions in Canada right now, to your knowledge?
In those two specific, it's very small. It's a very much of an elitist type sport. But in other sports, being shot with handguns, for example, IPSC, IDPA, Clash, there's a number of them. Cowboy action shooting. All these things involve the use of handguns. And this bill makes no reference to allowing those people to continue to recreate with their handguns. Interestingly, the Australian legislation that banned handguns specifically did. And to this day, they have thriving sport shooting communities in Australia that use handguns for sport shooting.
And you're aware that in the current version of Bill C-21, there are exemptions allowed for people who need handguns as a part of their normal jobs or for the protection of themselves. Like, for example, in a previous life, I was a tree planter for 8 years. I met a forester who was regularly out in grizzly country by himself, and he didn't go out unless he had his .45 with him. So that's an example of a profession where that would be allowed. So that's your understanding.
That program's been around a long time. It's called the Wilderness Carry Permit.
Yeah. But just to say that C-21 is not changing that. I also, when we had public safety officials before our committee for our first meeting on this bill, I asked them, because there's been talk about how businesses will be exempted, and I got them to confirm that gun ranges, for example, in my own riding, Couch and Malahat Langford, the Victoria Fish and Game Protective Association, they, as per public safety's understanding of this bill, they would be allowed to legally own a cache of handguns, which people could come to their range to use under the lawful supervision of an RPAL holder. So are you aware of that?
No, that's a new one on me.
Okay, well, they confirmed that would be allowed. So it would, in your mind, that would still allow someone to train, because they could come to their local gun range. They may not be able to own a handgun themselves, but they could pay for the privilege of using one at a licensed facility.
I have not seen that in this bill, I'm sorry. I will go back and redouble my efforts to scan through the bill, but I haven't seen that.
Okay. But in your mind, just like for the different disciplines, you would be in favor of just, maybe seeing a little bit more clarity on that because of just how elite the Olympic and Paralympic levels are?
It needs a lot more clarity because a championship shooter is like an NHL hockey player. They don't just fall off the tree. They require decades of training to get to where they have to be. Thousands and hundreds of thousands of rounds of ammunition to be able to get that good. It's a very difficult sport. And so there's no provision made here for somebody to start. Usually they start shooting when they're 8, 9, 10 years old, and it becomes a lifetime avocation.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. So thank you all. That brings us to the end of our questions. I thank the witnesses for being here today and for sharing with us your experience, your knowledge, and helping us with our study. With that, we are now adjourned.